April 1st, 2026. For the first time in 54 years, 4 human beings are on their way to the moon. But here's what that launch didn't show you. The years of disasters, failures, and decisions that nearly made it impossible. Hydrogen leaks, software lockouts, a hurricane, a heat shield nobody fully trusted, budget overruns that would make your head spin, and a program that, at multiple points, was one bad decision away from being canceled entirely. This is the full story. Everything that went wrong between NASA saying we're going back to the moon and actually going. And we start where it all started going sideways with the most expensive rocket ever built. The Space Launch System was announced in 2011. NASA called it affordable, safe, and sustainable. By the time it first flew, it had consumed $23 billion, more than the Apollo program, adjusted for inflation, and NASA's own Inspector General warned that a single launch was costing an estimated $4.1 billion. For context, SpaceX was flying Falcon 9 for around $67 million a mission. The reason SLS cost this much isn't a mystery. It was built from space shuttle components, the main engines, the solid rocket boosters, specifically because using existing hardware meant existing contracts, existing factories, and existing jobs in politically important states. It wasn't designed first and funded second. It was funded first. The design came later. That matters for everything that follows, because the pressure to protect those contracts, to justify those costs, to finally launch after years of delays, that pressure shapes every decision NASA made when things started breaking, and things started breaking before the rocket ever left the ground. August 29, 2022. Launch Attempt 1. Artemis I. The uncrewed test flight had been years in the making, and at T-40 minutes, an engine bleed test failed. You can't ignite a cryogenic engine at ambient temperature. The propellants have to pre-cool the engine hardware. One of the 4 RS-25 engines wasn't reaching the right temperature range. They scrubbed. September 3rd. Attempt 2. This time it was hydrogen, specifically, a leak at the quick disconnect fitting on the tail service mast umbilical, larger than acceptable limits. They tried a procedure to close the leak. It didn't hold. They scrubbed again. September 27th. Attempt 3. Another hydrogen leak at the same fitting, the same patch, the same result. And here is where the story gets uncomfortable. The reason the same fitting kept leaking is that the root fix, replacing the seals, couldn't be done on the pad. It required returning the vehicle to the vehicle assembly building, which would cost weeks and potentially the entire launch window. So engineers kept attempting workarounds, adjusting procedures, tightening parameters, changing the acceptable leak threshold. That last one is the part worth sitting with. At a certain point, NASA adjusted its own safety parameters to accommodate a leak rate they couldn't eliminate. They weren't being reckless. Every decision went through review, every number had rationale behind it. But it's a window into what sustained schedule pressure does to an engineering culture. The goalpost moved, not dramatically, but it moved, and then a hurricane showed up. November 2022. Artemis I is back on the pad for Attempt 4. Targeting November 14th, Hurricane Nicole is forming in the Atlantic. The protocol is straightforward. A Category 1 storm or higher threatening Kennedy Space Center means you roll back. You put the 322-foot, $8.8 million-pound rocket back in the VAB on a 6-mile-per-hour crawler, inspect it, and start over. Add weeks, maybe months. But the weather models kept shifting. For about 48 hours, Nicole's track suggested it might track south of KSE entirely. If that happened and they'd already rolled back, they'd have surrendered their window for nothing. They left it on the pad. Nicole hit as a Category 1. Artemis I took sustained winds of 82 miles per hour, gusts above 100. The structural wind limit for the vehicle on the pad was 85 miles per hour sustained. Post-storm inspection found torn RTV sealant on the ogive panels near the top of the rocket. A piece of weather protection foam had separated from Orion. Minor structural damage at multiple points. NASA called it cosmetic, accepted the risk, pressed forward. November 14, 2022, 1:04 a.m. Launch Attempt 4, hydrogen leak at the same fitting. Again, engineers ran the cryo-seating procedure, cycling the valve repeatedly, using the thermal contraction of the metal at cryogenic temperatures to tighten the seal. They ran it 3 times. On the 3rd cycle, the leak dropped inside acceptable limits. They kept counting. At T-10 minutes, a backup flight computer channel threw anomalous data. Not a hard abort criteria, but exactly the kind of reading that would normally generate a 20-minute engineering debate. They called it a known issue, logged it, kept counting. A boat moved into the maritime exclusion zone. The count held while Coast Guard redirected it. And then, finally, 8.8 million pounds of thrust. The the largest rocket to successfully launch since Saturn V. The sky over Florida lit up like midday. Artemis I was flying. For the next 25 days, Orion flew to the moon and back, farther from Earth than any human-rated spacecraft in history, without a single person on board. Mission accomplished. Crisis averted, except it wasn't. Because when Orion came home, something was wrong with the heat shield. When Orion splashed down on December 11, 2022, the recovery teams noticed something unexpected. The heat shield had charred unevenly. Chunks of ablative material, the AV coat foam designed to burn away in a controlled, predictable pattern during re-entry, had come off in ways the models didn't predict. Not catastrophically, not in a way that endangered the capsule, but in a way that nobody fully understood. For an uncrewed test, unexpected behavior is data. You analyze it, you learn from it, you move on. For a crewed mission, the next mission, it's a different question entirely. The investigation took months, then more months. Engineers identified the likely cause. The AV coat material was more permeable than expected, allowing gases to build up and escape more aggressively during re-entry heating. It wasn't a fatal flaw, but it was a real one. The fix for Artemis III, a redesigned heat shield, was straightforward enough in concept. The problem was Artemis II. The Artemis II heat shield was already built. Changing it wasn't a minor adjustment. It would mean scrapping hardware, restarting production, and adding potentially years to the schedule. So NASA faced a choice that doesn't have a comfortable answer. Fly the known imperfect heat shield on a crewed mission, or delay until you have a better one. Some engineers pushed hard to wait. NASA's own safety advisory panel flagged concerns. External experts who reviewed the data came to different conclusions. In January 2026, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman reviewed the full analysis and made the call. Fly. The data supported it. The margins were acceptable. Some of the engineers who had raised concerns said the additional analysis addressed their questions. Others continued to object. That's where things stood when Artemis II was being prepared. 4 astronauts. A heat shield with a documented anomaly. A decision that reasonable, qualified people disagreed on. And they hadn't even gotten to the launch scrubs yet. If you thought Artemis I's road to the pad was rough, Artemis II had its own version. The original target was September 2025. That slipped when engineers found problems with Orion's life support system, the hardware that would actually keep 4 people breathing in deep space. Not the kind of issue you paper over. Then the heat shield investigation ate more time. By late 2025, the target had moved to February 2026. They stacked the rocket. They rolled it out. On February 2nd, they ran the wet dress rehearsal, the full launch countdown simulation with propellants loaded, no crew. It didn't go cleanly. Cold weather delayed fueling. A liquid hydrogen leak appeared. At a fitting again, liquid hydrogen again, and had to be resolved before they could complete the test. A valve associated with Orion's pressurization system required what engineers call retorquing, which is a technical way of saying they had to stop and physically tighten a connection that wasn't where it needed to be. The February 6th launch attempt was scrubbed, then February 8th was scrubbed. Cold weather at KSC was pushing the wet dress rehearsal timeline, which cascaded into the launch window. Then, in late February, engineers found a problem with helium flow to the rocket's upper stage, not a patch-it-on-the-pad situation. NASA made the call to roll back into the VAB, for the second time in the program's history. The April window was the target now. March 20th, they rolled back out. They ran their countdown rehearsals. They resolved the helium issue. They cleared the range safety encryption. Because yes, they'd learned from 2022 April 1st, 2026. Launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern. The propellants loaded cleanly. No anomalous hydrogen readings beyond limits. No software lockouts. No hurricanes. At 6:35 p.m. Eastern, 11 minutes after the window opened, the Space Launch System lifted off from Pad 39B for the second time. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Jeremy Hansen, the first humans to leave Earth's gravitational neighborhood since Eugene Cernan stepped off the moon in December 1972. Their spacecraft, which the crew named Integrity, is not a perfect vehicle. Its heat shield has a documented anomaly that engineers are still studying. The program that built it cost more than it should have, took longer than it should have, and survived on political will as much as engineering excellence. None of that was visible from the beaches of Brevard County, Florida, on April 1, 2026. What was visible was a column of fire rising into the evening sky, 8.8 million pounds of thrust, a sonic boom that rolled 30 miles down the coast. 4 people going to the moon. On April 6th, Orion completed its lunar flyby, the first crewed spacecraft to reach the moon since Apollo 17. The crew flew within roughly 4,600 miles of the lunar surface, farther from Earth than any human beings in history. And they're coming home April 10th. Splashdown off San Diego. The disasters didn't stop the program. The cost overruns didn't stop it. The leaks and the scrubs and the hurricane and the heat shield and the rollback. None of it stopped it. What Artemis proves, in the most expensive and frustrating way possible, is that large, complicated, politically burdened programs, staffed by talented engineers, can still do extraordinary things. Just not efficiently, not cheaply, and never on the first try. The moon landing is still ahead, Artemis III, 2028, officially. No analyst in the industry believes that date is firm, but 4 people just flew around the moon. That part happened. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.